like Indus Valley civilization, most of it is in Pakistan, a lot of it is in India. Unfortunately, most of it that is in India is still underground. In fact, I'm working on an excavation in Rakhigadi. The entire village is on a mound, and on top of that mound is a heavily populated village. It also had a port, which is found in Gujarat, called Lothal. If you go to the National Archives of India and you see the library of texts, okay, take 9 to 10th century, and you see the variety that came out: Shaivism, Brahmanism, Vaishnavism, Shakta, Buddhist, Jainas, just their variety of texts, the philosophy that came out of India, it was mind-bogglingly deep. I cannot tell you, Ranvi. I used to come out of my classes and my brain was exhausted in places like Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, Japan, even alike. Why did they build a big Vishnu temple, Angkor Wat? Before a Vishnu temple was built in Cambodia, they worshipped Shiva for 200 years. So why did they switch to Vishnu immediately? And why did Vishnu not stick around? Because as soon as that particular king died, they suddenly switched to Tantric Buddhism. Why?
This was one of the most fun conversations of the year, and therefore it became one of my favorite conversations of the year because we went extremely deep with the conversation, but in a bit of a light-hearted way. We debated some points, and overall, at the end of this episode, I was left a much more enriched human being with much more enriched perspectives, especially when it comes to history. The people who have the biggest say in the world of historical debate, according to me, are archaeologists who dedicate their entire life to understanding the past of humankind. This one's a fantastic mind-bending episode. Anica Mann is on the Ranveer show for the first time because she's definitely a TRS all-star. And I use that statement with a lot of caution. Not everyone's a TRS all-star. We've probably got 5 or 6 cumulatively. And she's one of our 5 or 6 best guests that we've had on the show. You'll know why at the end of this particular episode. For more episodes just like this, make sure you follow us on Spotify. We're Spotify exclusive, which means that every episode's available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. Anica Mann breaking down history on The Ranveer Show. Enjoy yourselves. Anica Mann, I'm so pumped about this conversation. Now you get to see the real Ranveer because I've been holding back like shit since we've been talking outside. My God, teach me about archaeology and history. What's up?
Hey man, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
That felt so good.
Good.
Where do you actually begin this subject of archaeology though?
You know, in prehistory, I think.
Which means what?
You take it way, way, way back. The first time man found another man's things, you know.
Wow, I never thought of that.
That is how archaeology began.
The first time man found
another man's things.
Wow. Which is supposedly when?
Which is supposedly when, oh, well, I cannot tell. I think the first recorded man finding another man's thing comes from the colonialists. Take India, for example. The Archaeological Survey of India is the main archaeological vanguard of the country, the institution of the country, right? But it was founded by the British. Who was the British? It was this guy called Alexander Cunningham. He wasn't an archaeologist. He was a British officer. But what made him an archaeologist? He was actually a treasure hunter. Right? So he went around on a hathi, on a oot, you know, on an elephant, on a camel, all around the country, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. He was the guy who found Bodh Gaya. When he found Bodh Gaya was not Buddhist. It was inhabited by Shiva worshippers, growing trees on the pinnacles of the temple. But he found it. But he didn't find it as something, oh, I'm going to find it and preserve it. He's like, oh my God, what a treasure I've found. So let's get these treasures safeguarded so that we can keep it. Who was we? The institution at the time. So that's how archaeology essentially began, finding treasures,
Are there still a lot of treasures left to be found?
Oh, so many.
Countless
So
treasures.
many shipwrecks. So I run a project called Global Explorer that does satellite remote sensing for archaeology, or in short, space archaeology. It looks at you look at Uber satellite view imagery on your phone, right? All of that is satellite imagery. So when you look at satellite imagery from the top and you come down to the Earth, and you look under the surface of the earth, you find, and part of our project, we found that only 10% of archaeology has been discovered. What is
Wow.
archaeology? It is the history of humans. Human history, the true extent of human history has not yet been uncovered. And India is number one in being old. Okay. We are like absolutely number one in being old. Anywhere you dig, you will find something. So, yeah.
There's a lot of people who believe that India's number one in being old because of Indian pride. Okay, but if we just break away from Indian pride and patriotism for a minute and actually look at the science of it, is it because we're sort of an equatorial country, and when the ice ages happened, it's a possibility that our land wasn't covered by the ice?
There is some truth to what you're saying, because there's this book called Early Indians written by this guy called Tony Joseph, right? He's not an archaeologist or an anthropologist, but he did a good job in collecting facts from secondary sources primarily. So I'm not a big fan of secondary sources.
What does that mean?
Secondary sources are, if you've written a book, I'm quoting you. But what you've written a book, you have read the Shastras, you've gone to the site, that's primary sources. First-hand information is primary sources. Your interpretation of those is secondary sources. So when Tony Joseph wrote that book, Early Indians, he was writing about the earliest humans in India. And the one conclusion that he came up to was that India was always heavily populated. So I think it could match your theory of, like, during the Ice Age, was it more convenient for people to flourish in big numbers in India because of the kind of climatic conditions that existed? I would say yes.
But if you actually study the geography of the globe, like, we're in a tropical zone.
Subtropical, yeah.
Subtropical.
Yeah.
But doesn't that patch spread across the whole globe?
Yes.
So why don't we look at Iran, Mesopotamia, these places that share latitude with us as equally populated?
Actually, they also have been equally populated. And if you look at the earliest interactions of the earliest civilizations, they're very much Iran, Mesopotamia, India, Egypt. And why is that? It's because of that not tropical, but subtropical region that they existed in. Why do we love the Mediterranean so much? Because the climate is so congenial to all times of the year. So in India also, while I come from Delhi, where we have 4 distinct seasons, whereas you come from Bombay, which has one season with a dash of rain and with a dash of cold. I mean, sweatshirt cold, right? So, over here, you could nicely exist throughout the year, no problem. Ek ghar bana diya, it suits all climates. So that logic holds true for subtropical areas, where it's convenient to be living long term in this area without moving. Like in Mongolia, people would go to warmer terrains in the summer, in the winter, and stay in colder terrains in the summer. So we don't have that in India. People don't need to buy. Although the British, when they came to India, when they came to Delhi, they formed their summer capitals in the hills because they couldn't take the heat. So, yeah.
But again, why is India considered the oldest when actually even probably Mesopotamian regions, which I'm assuming is Iran and
They're
Iraq?
Contemporary.
Okay. It was at the same time. It was building up at the same time.
Mesopotamia and Indus Valley civilization, or Harappan civilization, were contemporary. They were trading with each other. We have Mesopotamian seals in our country. We have Indus Valley civilization seals in Mesopotamia. Iran played a very big role. I mean, Iran came up a little bit later because they were still hunter-gatherer, nomadic for a long time. In fact, if you look at how the Mughal Empire was formed in India and how Iran Iran was like, how the Vatican is for the Christians. So for the Muslims who were coming to India, Iran played that role of the high capital, the high culture, right?
Gotcha.
So they were nomadic for a long time till they came to India and settled. And if you look at the history of India, everyone was in search. Christopher Columbus kahan gaya? Wo to kho gaya na. He got lost and then he found America. But where was he going to? He was coming to India. Every route map wanted to come to India, not only in the earliest civilization, but up to the most contemporary civilizations, they want to come to India. WhatsApp is making big business in India. Everyone, even big businesses, want to come to India right now. There's something about the consistent population of India, the climate of India, the richness of the land of India, and by that I mean minerals, everything that you need in life, you have in this country. We're actually very fortunate.
Parallel breakaway.
Yeah.
The Indian military is supposed to be like one of the most high quality militaries in the world, just because of the variety of terrains in this country and the
Yeah.
variety of situations, which also probably makes it conducive for all the things that you're saying. That
Yeah.
it's like a bunch of countries built into one country.
Correct.
Which is just geography.
Yeah.
An outcome of geography. In saying that, because this is our English podcast, I don't want to dive too deeply into India. I feel like we'll do that on our Hindi conversation. I want to get like a bit of a worldview from an archaeologist's eyes.
Sure.
What is the consensus on the human story? Like, everyone knows this thing about how Homo sapiens originated in Africa.
Homo sapiens sapiens, yeah. Homo sapiens and then Homo sapiens sapiens, yeah.
You need to explain that as well as a part of your answer.
Yeah.
So if early man originated in Africa, they went into the Gulf and
Yeah.
then into India.
Yeah.
Is that a correct way of looking at things? And then I'm assuming this happened over like thousands of years, and people gradually settled, then moved on.
Yes.
So could you kind of dictate that entire story in terms of the first time a Homo sapien was born to a monkey?
Well, in the beginning of this podcast, I said only 10% of human history has ever been found, right? Everything that we know about us as humans, we have put together from everything that we have found from the past. And if everything that we found from the past is only 10% of what existed in the past, so most of our information is concealed. It's like how we know about space, right? We don't know enough about space. It's vast. It's hidden. It's not visible to the naked eye. Same thing with archaeology. Same thing with the human history. It's not visible to us. We have not found all the evidence. What we've put together, the global consensus that we come up to, that yes, most evidence has been found in Africa. Humans existed in Africa. There were multiple great migrations that happened.
How do we know that? How do we know that it actually originated in Africa?
No, I don't think we should ever, in terms of history, I don't think we should ever make strong statements that this is a fact. We should say this is a fact for now, because this is what we found now. We could find something later that could change the course of our understanding of human history, and we need to be open to that.
Like we could all be parts of alien races just coming together on this one
Hey,
planet.
man, this thing is such a trigger for most archaeologists, I always say this. So I remember I was sitting in Goa one day and I had this huge debate, and I got reminded of ancient times in India when the Buddhists and the Hindus used to, like Shankaracharya debating with the Buddhists, trying to say that what is valid in philosophy and all of this. So I was having this philosophical debate with a gentleman in Goa who had gone deep into this whole alien theory in archaeology and human civilization. And I kept repeating one thing. I said, I would love to accept your perspective if you give me hard evidence, not circumstantial evidence. Now, what is circumstantial evidence? Circumstantial evidence is, oh, you look like you have curly hair. Could you be South Indian? That is circumstantial evidence. But what is hard evidence is if I take your DNA and do an ancestry scientific analysis on you, then I say, oh, maybe you are South Indian, right? So that is the difference between circumstance. So this whole alien theory is full of circumstantial. I don't think there's any evidence, actually. It's all theories, right? And I said, this is the one thing that grinds my gears, that makes me not accept what you're saying, is that you're totally discounting the human feat. The whole theory of aliens coming here that, oh my God, this building is so odd, we can't make it now. So maybe humans didn't make them at all, aliens made them. I'm not going to accept that analogy so easily. I think humans are capable of great things. They built forts and cabins on top of completely difficult terrains, right? Machu Picchu. the pyramids, right? You come to India, they are carving out 1,000 lingas on the Tungabhadra riverbed, somewhere near Hampi. And if you say that no, humans cannot do this, they're not capable of it, I'm not going to accept that so easily. I think we're capable of great things. Yeah.
Okay, let's come back to that ancient man theory. So where the world of archaeology stands right now, it's a universal assumption
Yes.
that it began in Africa.
Yeah.
Why has that become an assumption? Like I'm actually just trying to learn. I'm not doubting it. I'm just trying to understand what
I still wouldn't call it an assumption. I think I would change that word into those. That is the evidence we have. So that's the fact that we are with right now. Those facts lead us to that conclusion. But as we discover more, like for example, earlier this year, there were prehistoric caves that were found in India, just outside Delhi near Faridabad. Now, Aravalli ranges, they're the oldest mountain ranges of the world, essentially, right? The shortest hills, but the oldest mountain ranges because completely wind eroded. And they found prehistoric paintings over there. So, what is the evidence of the kind of man that lived there? Now that those caves don't have any bone fragments or anything, so we can't tell anything about the people that lived there. But when we look at the paintings and the drawings inside the caves, what we can positively say is that they had a mind and they had an imagination, right? So everything that we say about very, very, very early man is based on a very small set of data sets. So we are what we are trying to do here, you and I, is romanticizing those small data sets and say that, oh, man came from Africa. I say, what we know right now is man came from Africa, but man could have emerged in different parts of the world as well, because the climatic conditions of Africa as they were, they did exist in other parts of the world. Now, depends on now, why do we have so much evidence from Africa? Do you know why? Because when Africa was partitioned by the colonialists and they went there, they investigated the land in that way. But certain countries that did not have colonialists coming there, they're not investigated in that way. So the way we write, so many parts of Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea, for example, Sumatra, Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand still did see the colonialists, the French, the British, the Portuguese coming in over there. But there are so many islands of this country that have broken away from the main landmass that still have human civilization living there. The Andaman Sentinelese Island, I can never pronounce that right, but they have the most pure human civilization, humankind living there. I don't want to call it civilization because we don't know much about them, right? But we haven't investigated that. So how can we jump to those conclusions when we don't have the entire range of evidence that can positively say that this is in fact the only fact? We could have multiple facts.
And 90% of history is either lost or not found yet.
Lost, not found, destroyed because of urbanization, all of that.
So, when you actually see a cross section of the earth, the crust of the earth is probably just like an eggshell.
Yeah.
Like as thin as an eggshell. And then the yolk and the egg white is inside.
Correct.
Which is the magma, etc.
Yeah.
Now, just in that eggshell, is there still a lot to be dug up?
Oh, huge amounts. Huge amounts. Let me give you an example. When Delhi has been a capital of the the South Asian civilization for a long time, a seat of capital, starting from Indraprastha, going to the Mughal capital, going to the British capital, going to the current day contemporary capital. And many rules in the current day contemporary capital have happened as well. Just recently, we saw India Gate completely, the Central Vista completely revitalized. It was recently opened, looks beautiful. But that area of Delhi, the central Delhi area, is so rich with evidence. You go to Old Fort, Purana Killa in Delhi. When you enter Old Fort in Delhi, you go up a hill. Why is there a hill in Delhi? Hill comes on the western southern side of Delhi. But here, why it's on a hill? Because it's on a mound. It is one of the most important excavation sites for Delhi. You go down to prehistory. So when you dig through Purana Killa, and you have the ASI has a museum called the Archaeological Site Museum over there. When you dig down, you see the like rings on a tree, you see layers of human history there, So, yeah, the crust is full of let's not even just call it human activity. It's full of living activity.
Dinosaurs?
Everything, right? Dinosaurs, mammoths, tigers, different kind of animals that are now extinct. We don't know anything about them. It is the crust that holds all of them. Their bones are decomposing, their teeth, their hair are decomposing within that. And in this decomposing layer also remain relics, like the relics of the Buddha. So when the Buddha died, what did they do? They took different parts of the... Why did we build stupas? What are stupas? Can you go inside there and there's a big hall inside? No. It is a structure of stucco, brick and stone that has a small little room underneath it. The stupa comes like a sphere and there's a line that goes down, chota sa, there's a small room underneath it. And in that room, you keep a relic, either a hair of the Buddha himself, the tooth of the Buddha. And when Ashoka came to power, he took it out from where it was originally housed and then redistributed it around the country. Sanchi Stupa, even up to Thailand, they have relics of the Buddha. So I come to the Buddha because not only do humans have rituals of putting and stashing away their things, but even animals, when they die, when a dog dies, what does a dog do? I don't know if you've ever had a pet, but I'm a crazy dog lady. So a dog, when it feels sick, it always goes in a corner and sits. You've seen it in the movies when the dog is dying, it goes into the forest and hides. So it wants to pass away in peace. So imagine, as living beings have come about, in how many corners have how many lives been lived and how many lives have been stashed away in the ground,
Intense. And which is getting started.
Yeah.
We spoke about how it's possibly originated in Africa, human life. This whole thing about migration of man all across the globe, etc. I've read so much about it lately, especially keeping this global warming and global freezing or global cooling periods in mind. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but the basic theory is that the earth keeps going into warming and cooling periods.
Certainly.
Which dictate water levels on the earth.
Certainly.
Which hides and exposes land masses.
Absolutely.
For example, where North America is connected to Russia right now, it's just a thin piece of land right now. I think it's barely even land. It's just water right now.
Yeah.
But it actually used to be a connected landmass, like a massive landmass.
Correct.
And the human migration happened that way. That what's said is that they originated out of Africa, came to India, spread all over Asia, then went into North America and went up to South America. And Europe also happened parallelly.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? And have they been able to predict this human migration because of kind of finding out the timelines of relics that are found?
I think it's geography and history that goes together. If you figure out the history of geography, that means you see how land masses have also evolved on their own, how ridges are found, how clefts are formed, how cliffs are formed, you're talking about Russia and America. In 2017, I took a 9,000 kilometer road trip around this country by myself, right? I went to, where India connects with Sri Lanka? That area is very similar, to what you're talking about between Russia and America. Because there, where the Ram Setu and all they say, right? I don't know about the Ram Setu or anything, but I can say that the landmass over there is so shallow that up to the most recent past, Sri Lanka and India were connected visibly. You see, that area is called Dhanushkodi. Dhanushkodi is close to a small town called Rameshwaram, where APJ Abdul Kalam came from. Rameshwaram is a holy city, and then Dhanushkodi was a Dutch outpost. And in earlier times when the Dutch was there, a terrible tsunami came and totally washed that place off. Now that place looks like a dystopic landmass, absolutely stunning. I cannot tell you how beautiful India is, by the way, when I took this trip around this country. But when I went there, I remember to go to that area, we had to go via an RTV bus, those high suspension buses, on an RTV bus to that area in the water. And while I was on that bus, I saw in a distance it felt like about 2 kilometers out in the water, there was a man in his lungi folded up, just walking on the water. It looked like he was walking on the water, but the water is so shallow. So the history of geography plays a very important role in understanding movement of living creatures, for that matter.
does it also play a role in explaining things like Atlantis?
Hey man, let's talk about Dwarka because, like, recently in India, off the Gujarat coast, there are so many cities that have submerged. Actually, recently in the news, so many cities have emerged out of the water because the water is just dried out, close to them. So, when I was a child, I used to love the story of Atlantis. I used to be like,
You'll have to give the people a 101 on the story.
on the story of Atlantis. It's a mythical realm that drowned underwater after a long time, short story. But I can give you a story about Indian Atlantis, that is Dwarka, right?
Sure.
Just off the coast of Gujarat. It was a city, a well-planned city that could have been a dockyard, a huge trading port for the country, essentially, with the rest of the world, especially Africa and Europe and Central Asia and all of that, that eventually got submerged underwater. I currently work with the Archaeological Survey of India. And underwater archaeology is a big priority for us, where you need to go underwater and see what is there, what was the extent of that landmass, how big did India look in the past, or how different did it look in the past.
Why are you saying priority?
Priority because it's the main, what is the mandate of the Archaeological Survey of India? It's three things: exploration, excavation, conservation. So exploration of the underwater heritage also is a priority for the country. There aren't so many experts in marine archaeology. Actually, when I did my first master's, I studied at the School of Oriental and African Studies. I went there primarily because they had a course in marine archaeology. Unfortunately for me, I think mera bura samay chal raha tha, but unfortunately for me, the professor who was teaching it went on a sabbatical. So I actually ended up specializing in esoteric Indian religions or Tantra in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So yeah.
Is Dwarka and all these like submerged parts of India a point of interest for the global world of archaeology as well? Like, are they looking at this particular region of the world as the next big historical digging site?
Not as I wouldn't call it the next big, but a very important site of interest. So we have a terminology in archaeology called AOI, area of interest, right? Why are they important, first of all? Because they're the first connecting point with other civilizations. Dwarka, that could have been submerged right now, could have been a point, a port where other people were interacting with India. So from that global perspective, they play a very critical role. See, like Indus Valley civilization, most of it is in Pakistan. A lot of it is in India. Unfortunately, most of it that is in India is still underground. In fact, I'm working on an excavation in Rakhi Gadi. Rakhi Gadi is in Hisar in Haryana, and it's a village. The entire village is on a mound. That means the entire village lives on a civilization that existed probably 10,000 BCE. Now we call it before Common Era. Earlier it used to be before Christ, but now we call it before Common Era. And CE instead of AD is called Common Era. So 1000 BCE tak, jo log wahan par, the people that were staying there, that area has filled up with dust. So thus there is a mound that is found. And on top of that mound is a heavily populated village. And we are conducting excavations over there. So the reason I'm talking about Indus Valley civilizations because that is the first civilization of India that had direct contacts with the rest of the world. It also had a port, which is found in Gujarat called Lothal. So places like Lothal that were receiving people from Mesopotamia, from Central Asia, and from where all, we don't even have the evidence because we can't read the Harappan script, right? Otherwise, we would know a lot more information. They serve a very important role in showing human interactions. You see, human interactions that are transcontinental.
Wow. Okay. Why are we taught in history textbooks that it's only 2,500 or 3,000 years old? Like, I remember these numbers and I remember reading them in 5th standard, thinking to myself that human history can't be that short if ancient man apparently originated 3 lakh years ago.
Yeah, textbooks simplify information for what can be absorbed. I don't mean to justify what information is in our textbook, but it is very subjective to the audience, right? But once you get into academia and you really truly get into history, right? And history is one of those subjects, it's either for you or it's not. It either makes you sleep or stay up at night, right? For me, it made me stay up at night. For some people, space makes them stay up, and because the vastness of it is so grand, right? So I see history in the same way. The vastness of it, the uncharted territory of it is so grand, but still it's in our control. We're still here. We don't need a rocket ship to go there, So it really gets me very excited. But what I said in the beginning, we have 10% of the evidence that we need to truly understand our origin story. So when you condense that for a 8th standard kid or a 5th standard kid, you really are giving very basic information and the most legitimate information. That iske upar, if more information comes out, the person has the capability of expanding their interpretative skills. But at least let us give them the most basic, like the earliest evidence of civilization of man. Early history of man and civilizational history of man have a big gap. And that gap is not because early man was not civilized or was a barbarian. It's because maybe we don't have so much evidence. If you go to the cave paintings that are found around the world, the quality of them is so fantastic. You see bisons and the way they make cattle, they make bovines, they make animals of prey in the kind of detail that they make it, and the way they show that man together are hunting and gathering in those paintings. I think there is a certain organizational level that we are not, revealing so much because we just don't have the information for it. It's all interpretative, right? So, yeah.
Okay, fair. Does the world of archaeology now still believe that in terms of the geography of the Indus Valley civilization, that it was around that North India and Pakistan area? Because I think I read somewhere that apparently now they're discovering that even places like Banaras, which are far more on the east, were existing at the same time as the Indus Valley civilization. As in what we're told was the Indus Valley civilization.
Yeah, the Indus Valley civilization spread in India is very vast. Most of it is unexcavated sites or mildly excavated sites. Rakhigarhi is one of them. Dholavira. I want to talk about Dholavira for a second, okay? Because it also comes near a sea area. It is on the India-Pakistan border in Gujarat. You know the place Rann of Kutch, right? It's a salt desert. Probably the most difficult place for not only man to live, but man to grow food to eat or drink water. But right in the center of this desert, back in 2000 or even 1500 BCE, not only did man stay there, but built a citadel, built an entire civilization, learned technique to filter salty water. We have water all around us, but not a drop to drink. That's what you say about ocean water. But they found a way to filter out that water, grow food, create trade objects, and set up an entire city there. How did they do that? When I went to Dholavira, I went there for a week-long survey with my team from America. Within the first day evening, my heels tore. You know, when you have too much dry, your skin cracks. My heels tore. So I wondered, how did man live here so many years ago? And it baffles, like it blew my mind about the human capability. So that's when people say, oh, in the middle of a salt desert, someone has come and set up an entire, maybe aliens did it. I was like, no, man, that's just rude. Come on. Like, I think we can do this, right? So it really is, human history goes back and back. But again, I cannot say this enough. What we found is so little. The theories that we're trying to weave are so grand that maybe if we found a lot more, they would be even grander, right?
Okay. Do you believe in this whole consciousness revolution that apparently happened? I think it was in 25,000 BCE, where suddenly culture started developing. I think I read about it in Sapiens, if I'm not mistaken.
I think cultures started developing far earlier than that. Okay. If you look at prehistoric cave paintings, not only in India, but around the world, and the way they flourished, right? There is a beautiful mind that is creating them. So I think humans and their mind and their intellectual power, their knowledge, their thirst for newer experiences existed right when they started hunting, I think. To hunt an animal that looks much bigger than you takes a lot of guts. Even if it is a herbivore. for that matter, even if you're hunting like a grass eating animal, but it's larger than you, it's stronger than you, it's probably a herd animal. Most herbivores are herd animals. But for man to think that I'm going to kill this and I'm going to eat this while he is with his friends is a grand idea. So consciousness, I think, developed very, very early on. But this is just my personal opinion.
What is this theory though? Because I think even Graham Hancock has spoken about this on Joe Rogan's podcast. He said that he's attributed this expansion of the human mind to psychedelics like ayahuasca, magic mushrooms, these things. I've had both experiences. I've had an ayahuasca experience. I've had a psilocybin experience with shamans. I felt like a different person after both. And I can totally understand where this theory comes from because I've seen the changes in my own mind. Higher levels of self-assurance, higher levels of creativity, etc. I'm not recommending that people go for these things. But in saying that, I want to ask you if you believe that psychedelics have actually played a role in the human experience.
So in India, for example, you're a yoga practitioner, right? Consciousness is the main thing that a lot of yoga practice helps expand, tap into. Breathing exercises clear your mind. Breathing exercise and certain yoga varieties can open up your mind and take you to transformative, transcendental, meditative states, right? If you breathe pure oxygen for 10 minutes, you could get high, right? So talking about just consciousness and expanding that, certainly if you have the right aid, you could do that. Mann has been doing that for a long time, whether it's using drugs or whether it's using just air around you and your body practice. Other than that, when you go to the text, when you do a havan, for example, in Hindu rituals, we have a havan. And we put water, Ganga Jal, you offer it to the gods and stuff like that. There was a term that was used for it called soma, right? There are certain brands that are called Soma right now. But Soma was considered by most scholars, and I say scholars, not only high scholars here in India, but also Indologists. Indology, by the way, is the study of India through its primary texts. You do not study about India from anything else other than what was written in India by the person, not his scribe, but by the person.
Which is what? Like which
Shastras,
texts?
right? Yoga Sutra, Manusmriti, all the sadhana manuals, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata are actually other kind of texts. They are like prose and poetry essentially, but philosophical text, deeply philosophical texts that came out from Kashmiri Shaivism, from Banaras, from South India, so many texts. I mean, if you go to the National Archives of India and you see the library of texts just in 1 century period, okay, take 9 to 10 century, and you see the variety that came out from Hindu, and forget Hinduism, Shaivism, Brahmanism, Vaishnavism, Shakta, Buddhist, Jainas, just their variety of texts. So I studied Indology, right? I went to the University of Oxford, did an MPhil in classical Indian religion, where my main study was reading Sanskrit and translating manuscripts over there. So when you study that and you see human philosophy, like the philosophy that came out of India, it was mind-bogglingly deep. I cannot tell you, Ranvi, I used to come out of my classes and my brain was exhausted because in one shloka, the depth that it took you to the human mind of understanding your consciousness, this whole practice, if you just go into Indian texts of understanding consciousness, of breaking it down, unpacking it, it will blow your mind.
Like, for example, what? Like, in terms of, I'm sure this happened at least 5 years ago?
My Oxford, it happened 2015.
7 years.
7, 8 years
So
ago.
in 7 years, you've got time
Not
to...
even 2015, I'm sorry, 2013. Shit, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Man, I'm old.
But those things you studied, I'm sure they've stayed in your head. You've lived out life.
They are my life's principles, essentially. So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
One of my favorite scholars is this scholar called Abhinava Gupta from Kashmir. He functioned in the 9th, 10th century. He wrote very important books called the Tantra Sara and the Tantra Loka. He talked about Shaivism. He was a worshipper of Lord Shiva.
Is he alive?
He functioned in the 9th, 10th century.
Oh.
Yeah. in Kashmir.
Okay.
Sorry.
Gupta sounds like a modern
Yeah,
surname.
Abhinava Gupta. No. He is very different than that.
Go on.
But he wrote this text, and this is what I studied when I was at Oxford. We were translating this text, and he talked about Kashmiri Shaivism. Kashmiri Shaivism, what is Shaivism? Shaivism is the worship of the cult of Shiva and all his associated deities, Ganesha, Parvati, all of that. And in that, he formulated a theory. I'm not going to get into it right now because it's too deep. And also, one needs to understand how does one practice and study their religion. You have to be initiated into it. There are different ways, right? But he came up with this theory of the Trika Shaivism, right? Where he placed the female identity very much at the center of the male identity. Okay, now let's take, this is a philosophy, okay? This is the mind. Now let's look at material culture, what things we can see, tangible things. If you see an Indic structure, it is generally pyramidal in nature, never square. Do you ever see a square temple in India? No. Even Buddhist temple, Bodh Gaya, it's triangular, almost phallic. There is another kind of temple that is called the Yogini temple or the female temple. You know how it is? It is circular. The Parliament of India, you've seen the Parliament building, it's circular. It is designed after the Yogini temple. The Yogini temple is circular and the male temple is phallic. And that is the union that leads to creation. You see, this is a philosophy that India made into 3D. Now, when we look at these temples around us, right, you look at any important temple, okay? If you look at the South Indian temples, you look at the East Indian temples, you look at the West Indian temples, you look at the Jaina temples, which are, they don't have so many gods and goddesses outside them, but they are highly geometrical, psychedelically geometrical. But each design has a very vital meaning of philosophy behind it. You look at the Khajuraho temples. We talk about the Khajuraho temples a lot, you know, the imagery out there. The Khajuraho, they have nothing on the Odisha temples. If you go to Konark, the vantage point of the absolutely outrageous sexual imagery that exists on that and the angle that you can see it from and what the sculptor is making you see and why is it outside and not inside the temple, there's very deep meaning behind it. And
Is the deep meaning that sex is just a fringe layer of life and then as you go in...
Sex leads to creation, number one. And yes, sex is part of normal life, everyday life. So what you see outside the temple is essentially a cosmology of activities, of gods, of goddesses, of Maithuna couples, you know, couples in amorous love and all of that. It is a representation, A, of our society, but B, also of a universe that churns the ocean in such a way that leads to the austerity of the central sanctum inside a temple. When you go to the very central sanctum inside the temple, you'll see it is the most simple, the most unadorned space. You know, it looks like a kutia. You know, like how old houses may have been, completely no design, just a deity in the center and a deep in front of it. Why? It is because when you look outside, the grandness of it leads you inside to the silence of the god, right? But you look at Greece, for example, you could be standing right in the center of the Parthenon, right? Which has pillars, 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 but you feel like you can't see it. You have to go far and see it. That's when you see the entire cosmology of it. But in an Indian temple, for example, you have to it keeps drawing you in because outside there is this replete imagery, but there's so much that you have to come close and focus on it. And once you focus on it and you go around, what do you do? What is the ritual of going to a temple? You go to a temple, you bow your head, you look for a Ganesha statue, you put your right shoulder to the Ganesha statue, and then you go around the temple. Once you go around and circumambulate, this is the process of circumambulation. You go around the temple, then you go inside the temple. Then you spend a moment in the mandapa of the temple, that is the outside terrace of the inside inner sanctum. You stand there, you pray to the god, ghanti bajao, god jag jayenge. Fir tum andar jao. You go inside and then you pray to the god. What is the main thing that you do while you're praying to the god? You do darshan, right? They always say, I'm going to do darshan. What is darshan? You look at the eyes of the god. When a temple is made, for example, the last ritual that is done to open the temple to the public is incising the eyes of the god, because you are supposed to look into the eyes of the god and make your prayers. That is for the common man. The initiate, however, and depends on the level of initiates, right, has a different form of practice as well. And depends on the realm that you are from. Are you a Shakta? Are you a Shaiva? Are you a Vaishnava? Do you say Jai Shri Ram? Do you say Om Namah Shivaya? Or do you say Ma,
Because you're an Indian archaeologist working with the Archaeological Survey of India, I'm assuming you've gone to a lot of temples all over the country.
Yep.
Have there been temples where parts of them are not allowed to be excavated or not allowed to be explored?
Yeah.
There are. What is the reason for that?
Instability of the structure.
Okay. There's nothing like, how in they say with the pyramids, you unlock a part of it and curses get unlocked.
There's one in India also, no? There's a temple in
Kerala?
the south. Yeah, temple in the south where there is vaults of wealth inside it, gold, wealth and all of that. And the door looks like it's a very cursed door. I've not been to that site myself. I also think that's a bit of a conspiracy theory. But there are several parts. I mean, see, so, okay, this is a joke we make in the ASI. They say Bhangar Fort in Jaipur is haunted, right? ASI का गार्ड रोज वहीं पर बैठता है रात और दिन उसको कुछ नहीं हुआ अभी तक nothing happened to that man. There is a guard, there's a security guy there every single day and night. Nothing happened to him. But yet, there are certain... Having said that, I'll say another thing. Angkor Wat, which is the largest temple in the world. It's in Cambodia. The way the temple was made... Okay, there are many things I want to say about that temple, but the way the temple is made, there was this one scholar called Eleanor Manica. She did a study on the movement of energy around that temple. She measured that temple and she found that temple to have very precise dimensions, very precise, down to the decimal, And then when you go to a temple, like I said earlier, you circumambulate the temple. So when a flow of people, of devotees happens constantly over decades and over centuries in a certain way, energy gets channelized, right? So she even took scientific instruments over there to measure, is there a certain energy, movement of energy? And she did find that. So, like I said earlier, there are various forces that exist beyond our capability to access. And we must use our science to see if they do exist in that way. So there are many places that we can't go to because they are unstable. There are many places we can't go to because people's beliefs are so strong that you cannot make it a scientific inquiry lab. You have to allow continuity of worship or whatever. So yeah, that happens all the time.
One supplemental question here is, are there secret or hidden chambers in a bunch of these temples / places of worship?
There are many chambers that are shut to the public. For example, in the Red Fort, the most beautiful part of the Red Fort is the Queen's Hammam. It is the most delicately carved marble of the Queen's bath. And nobody is allowed to go there. And why? It's because the marble is so soft over there that if general traffic got there all the time, it would all crack and, gray and it would just disintegrate. So there are many chambers in many places. The other thing is, in a lot of Mughal monuments in and around Delhi, even if you go as far as Sonipat, some of them came up with tunnels that lead all the way to Delhi, you see, and those chambers are shut, for example. Right? They're shut for security reasons and stuff like that. So there are many things like that. But if you're talking about, are they shut because of spiritual inhabitation or some kind of metaphysical reasons, at the ASI, we believe not. At the ASI, we put things out of access primarily to conserve them and to stabilize a monument.
Gotcha. Okay, we just spoke about God and the metaphysical realm and everything that's outside the material realm. This mic, you and me, human society, human civilization. What I've understood is you do believe in some sort of a higher power or things beyond what the eyes can see or the ears can hear, etc., etc. And I'm kind of assuming that your reason for getting into history is the vastness of it, and you've just realized how much you don't know about history.
Yeah.
Even though you've dedicated your life to archaeology and history.
Yeah.
So the deeper you go into history, do you realize these kind of metaphysical things even more deeply? And was that a part of the studies you had related to Tantra, etc., etc.? Did you kind of look at all these things and almost think to yourself, yeah, Harry Potter could have happened?
Yeah, sometimes I do feel that, like, important scholars, historic scholars of India who chose austerity, went into the forest, meditated upon things for the longest time, and then wrote these books. The kind of books they have written, I'm reading their words. And mind you, when they're writing this book, it's not like us just writing, today I woke up and it's in prose. That means they're writing in Sanskrit, right? They're writing in Sanskrit in such a way, and Sanskrit in prose is written that everything has a meter. Right? When you say Sanskrit verses, Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva, Tvameva Dravinam Cha Sakha Tvameva, it has a meter, right? And you have to restrict yourself in that meter. So imagine the vocabulary that they had to delve into to keep it to that meter so that you can chant it out. The things that you chant are in a particular rhythmic fashion, right? That's what a meter is. And when you do things in a rhythmic fashion, it creates a kind of vibration around you, which channels the atmosphere around you a certain way.
From a more biological level, like in yoga, we have something called cosmic chants, which is basically this,
It's
bhajans.
exactly that.
And because you're chanting it out, it sets your breathing pattern in a certain way. The breathing pattern has an effect on your heartbeat. Your heartbeat has an effect on your mind.
Yeah.
And therefore, once you've chanted a cosmic chant or a bhajan or a shlok, you feel calm.
You feel calm.
Because actually
and
breathing
most
pattern...
places, if you've ever been to a yoga ashram or a place where people are in constant practice of respect of the environment, you notice that there is a different energy, right? You notice that there is a lightness to the air. You notice that there's a fragrance to that air. Why? It's not because of the agarbatti. It's because people have been working that environment in a certain way the whole time, that the wheel has been set in motion in that way. You see? So certainly the environment around you can be channelized as well.
Yeah. Have you ever experienced Tai Chi by any chance?
Yes, in Japan. I lived in Japan for 2 years. Okay. And you know where I experienced it? It's a funny story. So I went to Japan where I was the peak of my youth, my golden years, when I was 25, right? So I lived in Kyoto, which is the imperial city and just the most beautiful human civilization that I have seen in current days, who have absolute respect for people around them, space, nature, and everything. So Kyoto is a city that is a valley surrounded by hills on 3 sides, pierced right in the center by the Kamogawa River, which is a very shallow river. So when we used to go out on weekends, we used to sit by the Kamogawa River. And my home was on a slight hillside, just 10 minutes away from there. I went to Kyoto University, or Kyoto Daigaku as they call it over there. And my home was right next to it. Right above my home in Kyoto, because it is also a very religious city, they have 5 kanji symbols or Chinese characters carved into the mountains. So wherever you're standing in Kyoto, when you look up at the hills, you can see those characters. And once a year, they burn those characters, which is like how we do Shraddh. We mourn our ancestors. They also have a Bon festival where they mourn their ancestors, and when they set that on fire.
Isn't Bon like a Tibetan religion?
Bon. No, not. I mean, yes, it is a realm of, but this is a kind of a festival there.
Okay.
You know, so I lived below one of these signs. So one day on a regular Saturday, we were having a drink, and the night just went into the morning, and I said, I have the best idea. Let's climb this hill, and on top of the hill, the grandmas and the grandpas who take their morning walks, they do this. The Japanese radio comes on with aerobics, right? And Tai Chi sometimes. So let's go and catch the grandmas and grandpas up there and do Tai Chi with them. And that was my first experience with them. Yeah.
Dragons, huh?
Oh, man. Dude, you're going to get me fired talking about dragons.
Why?
Yeah, we can talk about dragons. I'll give you the art historical perspective on it.
Give it to us, but also, why is it bad for an archaeologist to talk about these things beyond the realms of what we know? Is it because there's a lack of evidence?
Yeah.
I feel if there's a lack of evidence, definitely that conversation can go bad. Like you can go into any realm, and then you don't even know where to stop.
So I'll say this, right? Dragons, we haven't found them, but we found drawings of them everywhere. representations of them everywhere. In China, we all know it. In India, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, I'm saying Southeast Asia and Indonesia are, in the same region. We find drawings of these sea animals called makara. Okay. And what happens is when you enter a temple, especially in Southeast Asia, at the door lintel, you might see it in Bali and all, you might have this face coming out and all of these kind of water-like designs around it. And that animal is called the makara, which is the sea dragon. It is a sea animal that, again, is representative of creation in a certain way, of destruction in a certain way alike, but very similar to a dragon. Similarly, when you go towards South America, etc., again, they have certain representations that connect a sea animal that has unnatural capabilities, like fire may come out from its mouth, or wind, a gust of wind may come out from its mouth, or it can wallop or eat anything or swallow anything. So these mythologies that were created, you see, the first gods for humans were always the natural forces: Surya, the sun, the wind, the fire, right? Most religions, across religions, you will see the beginning part of something that you worship was something that you were scared of. Then that something that you worship water. Then it began, you worship sea. Then you worship the demons that live within the seas. Why did dragons and these sea monsters become popular? Because seafaring became very popular in society. Man had started building ships and boats and they were going over the waves. Do you think man understood what a typhoon was that time? Do you think they understood how a 10-foot wave can come up and destroy entire civilizations? No, they gave it certain names. And those names were not tsunami and typhoon. Those names were dragons and sea monsters.
Okay, but that also doesn't discount the possibility that there could have been megafauna, which probably had some sort of capabilities.
Yeah, the sad part is, when there are maritime animals, the evidence gets lost in
The ocean.
So what you don't have evidence for remains a mythology. What you have evidence for becomes a fact.
Or parallelly, when you're talking about flying creatures, chances are they had hollow bones, and hollow bones erode very fast.
Yeah.
Do you study megafauna, these big animals? Not at all?
No. So my period of study, whenever you meet a historian or you meet an archaeologist, they generally specialize in a very small time period, because in that small time period only, you will never finish your study in one lifetime.
Gotcha.
You see? So my time period actually begins from early 6th century CE and goes to the late 12th century CE. So a good 6 centuries that I primarily study. Other than that, I love studying the origins of Buddhism and the expansion of Buddhism, which started from like 500 BCE probably and goes on till.
Why did you choose that time period? That's 600 to 1200-ish?
Because what fascinated me most about studying history was the idea of India and the role India played in the larger Asian identity in the ancient and early medieval period. India at that particular point in time, you see, this time India had 6 universities: Nalanda, Vikramashila, Takshila, Somapura, Udantapura, and one more. These universities were so grand. They were Buddhist and Hindu universities alike, right? They were so grand that people from right up to Japan, from Cambodia, from Thailand, from China were coming to India. Hyun Sang, I Ching, all of these Chinese scholars. Why did they come to India? Because India was a throbbing motherland of civilization, of culture, of intelligence. With these universities, India was what Oxford is to the world or what Harvard is to the world. And in fact, there is epigraphic. Epigraphy means inscriptions, right? Translating of in the science of studying inscriptions. There are inscriptions in Indonesia, there are inscriptions in Cambodia that says that if you want to go to study in Nalanda, you must give a preliminary Sanskrit exam here. Once you pass, then you will go to India to study. You go in current day to Sarnath. You've been to Varanasi. Did you go to Sarnath?
Yes.
So in Sarnath is a very funny ASI metal board. Please do not put gold on the building. When these people came from faraway lands, whether Indian or outside India, to these universities, their main form of devotion, you see, in the Indic, we have karma, right? In that, you want to accumulate merit. You give donations. When you give a donation, when you give a bench, why do you give a bench as opposed to just food? Because if I give you food as a donation, once you eat the food, my merit is 1 point. But if I give you a chair, every time someone sits on that chair, I get merit. My family gets merit. So thus, it's a much more tangible gift. So when people came to these universities, their gift to the institution was taking gold foil and putting it on the building. Now, if every pilgrim or every scholar did that, you can just imagine that these buildings were gilded in gold and shining with wealth. We all know that Buddhism ceased to exist in India in the mid-medieval period. It was wiped out of India and raced out of India in 3 waves. And then it went through 2 directions outside the country, the northern route and the southern route. It went towards Sri Lanka, it went towards Tibet, China, Southeast Asia, eventually to Japan, right?
How was it wiped out?
It was wiped out primarily because Buddhism was essentially attacked by rival religions. These universities like Nalanda, Vikramashila, Takshila were set on fire. They were burning. The libraries of Nalanda were burning. The texts were rapidly taken to Nepal and stuff like that. So my dissertation at Oxford when I was studying classical Indian religion was translating a manuscript from 11th century Vikramashila, which was a highly tantric sadhana manual. Sadhana is like meditation. When you're within the realm of tantra and you're following a particular cult of a god, then in your daily religious practice, you're supposed to pray 4 times a day. And where you're supposed to pray, how you're supposed to pray. And this is a manual that allows you to do transcendental meditation. So I was translating and transcribing it. Translating it obviously from Sanskrit to English and Hindi. Transcribing it was written in Sanskrit, but in a very tedious language. So most tantric literature is not straightforward. It is called Gupt Vidya. You have to be an initiate to understand the true meaning of the words that are used over there.
Like poetry? Like, is it?
It is poetry, but poetry that has a concealed vidya, that has a concealed knowledge within it. It could mean that you must pray to the lotus daily. But in tantric texts, the lotus is not essentially the flower. The lotus actually means the female vagina. So you have to know these things. You have to be initiated. You have to have years of study before you understand the true meaning of what is written in the text so that you can meditate upon it properly and you can visualize the God properly. We all know that in the way we pray, when we set up a regular prayer altar, you have certain rituals that lead up to actually accessing the deity. First, you clean the area. Any religion. Choose any religion. First, you will clean the area. You will make it inhabitable for the deity himself to come over there. Then you will clothe the deity, you will bathe the deity, you would feed the deity. And then you would say goodbye to the deity and then you would apologize to the deity, right? So all of these things, how they are done is very different from one god to the other. And the purpose of why you're praying to that god. Earlier, we had many rituals for rain making, for example. That was one of the main reasons that Indic religions were adopted in Southeast Asia, in places like Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, Japan, even alike. Why did they build a big Vishnu temple? Angkor Wat is the largest temple in the world. It's a Vishnu temple. Why did they build it? Before a Vishnu temple was built in Cambodia, they worshipped Shiva for 200 years. So why did they switch to Vishnu immediately? And why did Vishnu not stick around? Because as soon as that particular king died, they suddenly switched to Tantric Buddhism. Why? The reasons is because religion provided that tool for state building, for royal patronage, for deifying the king into a god himself, he becoming the theological head of the society. What does it mean, theological head of the society? I myself am the god resides in me. There are many rituals that have happened that the god resides in me. Now, why Vishnu? Vishnu was, and why the biggest temple for Vishnu? Because Vishnu is a deity that is usually worshipped when you want to consolidate an already large empire. You want to consolidate it and you want to give people like, I'm here to stay. Things are not about warfare right now. Things are about state building right now. Okay? Why Tantric Buddhism? Because that time the state was under attack. So that religion gave them the tools to defend their enemies. The Vietnamese were attacking Cambodians, the Thais were attacking Cambodians at that time. Suddenly they switched to Tantric Buddhism, where they, I don't know if you've seen Lara Croft.
Yeah.
In that, there are these temples in Cambodia which have faces coming out.
Yeah.
This was the temple that I wrote my first dissertation on, right? And these temples were Tantric Buddhist temple, and the largest building program occurred in this country in mid 12th century Cambodia. While they built these temples, they also built the largest network of hospitals. What does that evidence tell us? A, the king is expanding the realm of his kingdom. B, while he is expanding the realm of this kingdom, there is a lot of warfare because he's building institutions to tackle the injured soldiers, hospitals, right? C, he built the largest network of libraries as well. While he's expanding, his troops are still being kept busy with books and being centered to that thing. So you see, religion serves several purposes. But coming back to your original question, I studied India and that time period because I was interested in the role that India played towards the larger Asian identity, towards building an Asian identity, something that is very seldom explored in India. I think last it was explored in the most deep way was when the Tagores were, building Shanti Niketan, and they were inviting the Japanese and Chinese scholars alike to Bengal, and they were going into the Asian. They were very much about the Indian identity, but they were about the role of India to the world. And I think that is something that still, I think I have a purpose there. I have a mission in my mind to study history from that perspective, to talk about the depths of intellectual, brilliance of our country, philosophical brilliance.
One last question I have for this particular episode. And I'm really stopping myself from asking you further about what you just spoke about.
I just got warmed up right now.
Good, say it in Hindi.
Abhi to shuru hua mera kahani batana.
Does the world of archaeology generally get very fascinated with Egypt/ancient Egypt? Because I believe that the Egyptians that we know of consider themselves to be a modern civilization, and they consider an even more ancient civilization to be the actual Egypt, where some people say that entities like Ra, Isis, Osiris, I believe was the name, actually existed as kings or queens back then. So how does the modern world of archaeology look at Egypt?
So my boss is actually an Egyptologist.
Is he Indian?
She, first of all. Her name is Sarah Parkak.
And she's alive.
She's alive. She actually is a TED Prize winner. She won $1 million to do her work in Egypt. And this is the project that I actually brought to India. I raised funds for it from Tara Trust, and I am deploying satellite remote sensing, a lab, and archaeology, which is called space archaeology, for the Archaeological Survey of India. This was my first project, which is still yet to be deployed and totally harnessed in ASI, but we're working hard every day. But she is an Egyptologist. And she would better be able to answer the questions about Egypt. I'm not an Egyptologist. My focus is on Asia, and I just do not, I might not even know my facts about Egypt that well, because I focus so much in Asia, Cambodia, Thailand, Japan, Korea, and all of those areas. And I still consider myself a student of history. I don't ever, and I've taught in a university, I work for the ASI, my hands are rough like an archaeologist's hands, but I will still always consider myself a student of history. So in terms of Egypt, yes, the storytelling of the Egyptian history has been done not only in textbooks that are school books in Egypt, but also abroad, and also in the movies so well, right? So well. In fact, my boss, Sarah, when she started using satellite imagery for Egypt, in a span of a year, she actually found 1,000 new pyramids, several digging holes. Now, the main work that we do, why we use satellite remote sensing for archaeology, is because countries like Egypt, Italy, and India are one of the biggest victims of illegal trafficking of antiquities. What does that mean? If there is an unsecured temple, you could go to that temple and you could break a sculpture. You could sell it in the black market, which would find itself in a big museum or a big auction house and would sell for millions of dollars. It is at par. The illegal trade of antiquities is at par with drugs and ammunitions the world over. So much that there are laws against it, right? But that is what made Egypt a big victim of antiquity looting, made Italy a big victim of antiquity looting. Currently, you will hear a lot of stories that India is getting this sculpture back, the British Museum is full of Indian loot. It is very true. It is a true fact. And Egypt, really suffered because it was the first country whose history became really popular. I am, again, not an expert on Egyptian history, but when you look at the gods that you did mention, Ra, Isis, if you look at the origins of those gods, their origins are in the forces of nature, in the natural forces that are beyond human capabilities, that are beyond human understanding at the time that they were, not understood. So, yes, in terms of Egyptian history, they've gone a very far way to capture popular imagination. India is number one in being old, has so many stories, but they still exist at a meta level. I think also in our country, I hate to say this and I urge, it's my plea and prayer to everyone. I feel like we need to stop taking our history and our culture for granted and really get into it. We take it for granted because in our daily homes as Indians, we're very cultural beings. In our daily homes, we have things that make us cultural people, not like in America. In America, it's a choice, but we grow up with culture all around us. So we tend to take it for granted. But at the same time, we also consider ourselves experts of culture. हमारे घर में, it happens like this. In that house, you're from that community, so you might have these practices. You're from this community, you might have these. And you think you're an expert, but it is a science. Culture is an invisible, visceral, deep science that has the deepest truths about human intelligence. So we should never take it for granted. Why a temple is built a certain way, or why is a burial done a certain way? Why are you being buried with pots and pans and jewelry alike? Every culture could have a different reason for doing that, even though they may be doing it in the same way. So,
in saying that, I want to ask you one final question on the show. Maybe it's a yes or no answer. Do you believe or do you know if geopolitics plays a role in revealing or hiding certain aspects of history?
Yeah.
It does. Okay. Because if everything is revealed, it will change the way humans look at themselves.
I mean, humans look at themselves in so many ways, and geopolitics is so sort of deeply ingrained from early societies into the nature of man, my territory, my land, my domestication, my animals. I want rain now. I want to build a wall. I want to, all of this. This is all geopolitics, right? It's like protecting your resources for generations. I don't know. I'm not so sure of generations to come as much as protecting your resources for the course of your lifetime and the life that you have envisaged for your children.
Yeah. This is what bothers me a little bit about where history and historical research stands today. It's still dictated by rich and powerful people in terms of what's available in the public domain, and we don't know what we don't know.
I wish the rich and powerful people, I actually do want to make a call to action right now. I wish rich and powerful people of India invested into their history and their culture as much as they talk about it. Let me tell you, philanthropy in this country for archaeology is so backward, so bad. Besides one big business house of India, I challenge all cultural practitioners to find me one consistent other business house in this country that has continuously and in a sustained way done not returns on investment, not investment. I don't want to hear the term returns on investment when you invest in Indian culture and Indian history and Indian archaeology. I want to hear philanthropy, right? I don't want to hear your branding exercise when you talk about philanthropy. I want to talk about how do you donate give grants, not even donate. Nobody wants a donation. It's a grant, right? You check the progress of the grant, but you don't look for what I'm getting back. I challenge the cultural practitioners to find me the business houses, even from today or yesteryears, apart from one consistent one. And I'll say it out aloud. It's the Tatas, because you have museums that are full of Tata, and you have the Tata Trust, which is a 125-year-old organization. It is one that has run a magazine called the Marg magazine, funded it solely throughout, which is one of the most important cultural journals, consistent and sustained cultural journals of this country. But apart from that family, I don't think any big business house in this country has done any large-scale, tangible, sustained work. There's always a one-off here and there. But it's not as if their mission is focused towards preserving India's culture. It's never focused towards that. And whenever they do that also, they do it in their own name. And that's not philanthropy. True philanthropy is funding the existing structures of India. Fund excavations at the Archaeological Survey of India. Fund building out archaeological sites so that we can understand the true extent of our human history. But it does not exist. So there is a big dichotomy in this country, and I would like to devote my entire life towards it, where I want to explain to people, if you love Indian culture, you must give back to it. And the way you give back to it is not taking control of it, is give assistive care to the existing institutions in this country that are doing that work. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. Support the existing carriage.
What's the deeper call to action? Like, can we have a link, or like how do you actually begin that process? Because there's a lot of people who may
the simplest way to do it, the Archaeological Survey of India has a National Culture Fund where a lot of people can give financial aid to the Archaeological Survey of India to conduct its main activities, which is exploration, excavation, conservation.
Gotcha.
So that, I'm not here to put out that call to action. It's not my call to action. But in general, I want to say, if you truly care about Indian culture, you could practice it in your homes. But you have to give back to society in a way where you don't. And I've worked in a bank, by the way, handling a cultural fund. And I saw big business houses come in and they asked that question, but what is our return on investment? I was like, I think I need to give you, a class about how philanthropy works, how CSR works, how investing works, how marketing works. When you're investing and you're doing marketing, ask that question. But when you're doing CSR and when you're doing philanthropy, you do the deed and you follow up on the legitimacy of the person, but you don't look for what you're getting back then. You be on top of the people by all means, that they should achieve what they have taken. Read those utilization certificates to the T, okay? But you don't ask that, what am I getting back in return? Is my name being flashed in some report? That's not true philanthropy.
Anica Mann, thank you for a blockbuster episode. Wow.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my own personal concern with continuing this podcast in general is, where will we find our next guests? 'Cause I always feel I've run out of guests and then people like you come along. So crazy. You were built for the world of podcasting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, thank you.
I feel there's 100x larger amount of data to unpack with you, which we'll do over the course.
We didn't even get into hardcore archaeology and exploration and what sites have I been to. We just talked about, large, things that are really around us right now. So maybe next time we can go deeper into places.
It gives me a lot of joy knowing that you come to Bombay often. Yeah. So we will figure some.
We are friends now.
Yes.
We will meet.
This was so much fun. Now you understand why I was pumped about this particular episode. I read your name on our schedule and I was pumped. Maybe a couple of months ago, because I think it got scheduled a couple of months ago. Yeah. It's been 2 months leading up to this, and I'm so happy.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. This meant a lot.
Cheers.
Fantastic. That was the episode for today. The first ever episode that we did with Anica Mann. I enjoyed every single minute of this conversation. As you can tell, if you're listening in till this point, I'd love recommendations from you guys, the audience, in terms of who else you'd want to see on the show. Are there more archaeologists that you'd like to see on the show? Are there more historians you'd like to see on the show? Please let us know in the comment section. Please let us know on our Instagram. And remember, we have a highlights channel called TRS Clips, where you'll find the best bits of every episode broken down, etc., etc., etc. So, if you're someone who enjoys history but you don't know where to begin this race when it comes to accumulating knowledge from podcasts, TRS Clips is a fantastic way to begin. We've actually curated playlists for you right there. And until then, make sure you follow us on Spotify. Every episode of TRS is available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. The Ranveer Show and Anica Mann will be back soon. Thank you for listening in.